Well, hi everybody. This is Dr. Winkler again. This is for the Ancient Civilization course. And let me make sure I'm telling you right. This is lecture number 12. So we're moving right along. We're getting deep into the course. And we're finally talking about Greece. I feel kind of bad. Remember last time when I started talking about Homer and his writings? And I had to break it off before I got deep into it. I could see the disappointment in your eyes. This poor guy. He's not doing what he ought to do. Well, let me apologize. And now we can start with this lecture and continue with the discussion of Homer and his works. So I get a picture of Homer up here. Yeah. We don't know what he looked like. There was nothing taken from life. You say that looks like an elderly Greek gentleman? Fine with me. He had to look like something, and that's probably as good as any representation we could come up with. I was talking to you last time about this is the first great European literature. And remember, this is very, very unusual because usually we think of high points of civilization, including poetry in this case, that would come in large cities after large development. We have a large community to appreciate what you're doing. This is very unusual. This person is a poet, somebody who's making up stories that have some basis in fact in many cases. And he's doing so in a very entertaining manner. And he's making a living by doing this, by reciting this. Now, if you're going to recite a book, in this case 2 books, well, we've divided into 2 books. This is not an after dinner thought for an hour or 2. No, this can go on all evening and probably several days in a row. This is a good way to entertain a lot of people. Well, I already talked about the brilliant meter we see virtually throughout the thing. People have actually asked, in reality, are we talking about one author or several authors? If we look at it stylistically, it's virtually the same stylistically throughout, which would give us an indication, very strong indication, that we're talking about only one author. If we had different kind of style, different kind of meter, different kind of approach, we would say we're talking about multiple authors. But in reality, we're talking about one. There's only a few places in the entire thing. It might be very late in the narrative, actually, where it does look a little bit different. So maybe there was a little bit of maybe a lost piece of a document. Somebody kind of filled in the blanks. But overall, this is one person. Now, to talk about speaking with the meter, that's brilliant by itself. But then telling the story. The stories here are really quite stunning. Now, we talk about the Iliad. Remember, that's the story of the siege of Troy. Helen got drug off, and everybody in Greece decides, let's go over and take down those doggone Trojans. And we lay siege for many years. You have heroic kind of events, some of which is somewhat plausible. Something like the Trojan horse, I'm going, well, I don't know. The Trojan horse doesn't sound very plausible to me. But we're talking good stories. Perhaps of the 2 books, the one that's actually most famous happens to be the Odyssey. There's a man by the name of Odysseus, who was a minor character in the Iliad. We don't talk much about him at all. But now when he's going home, it takes him, well, we say the siege of Troy is about 10 years. And then Odysseus' return is another 10 years. So we're going to talk about this guy being gone from home a very long time. In looking at what we call internal evidence, in other words, in the poem itself, are there descriptions where we can actually place him and his voyage at various places at various times. Remember I said the lotus eaters I was actually wrong. I told you last time I thought the lotus eaters were kind of directly south. I was right, they are in Africa, but not directly south and not in Libya. It's over here they got blown off course over in Tunisia. We do some running around here. The Cyclops, we believe, is his name Polyphemus? The Cyclops is over here in the island of Sicily. Modern people say there are caves there. And is it possible that Homer knew something about the caves and obviously made up the idea of the Cyclops? In other words, a basketball player with one eye. Possibly. Of course, the whole idea. This is just fun stories. Odysseus puts out his one eye, but the Cyclops wants to eat everybody. And how does Odysseus get out? Well, you hold on to the sheep underneath the sheep go out, and this enormous man, this blind man, is trying to fill the top of the sheep and can't fill the people on the bottom of the sheep. That's a good story, isn't it? Well, from the various accounts, and there are scholars that look at this slightly different from others, probably describing a bay up here in Sardinia, comes across over here. Now, in the ancient world, you don't really have hotels and motels. When people travel, they tend to go to local people, and you get put up for the night. You pay for it usually, and if they're nice people, you have a nice place to stay. I believe it was over here where Odysseus met Ajax. Now, Ajax was killed over in the Trojan Wars years before, and he's gone to his the next boat. We don't really have it. It's a little bit like the Gilgamesh. Remember, Gilgamesh is pessimistic. Can we say to a certain extent Greek ideology is pessimistic as well? Because when you die, they're not talking about a glorious, wonderful heaven. No, Ajax is this wonderful man, and he's in a very, very unpleasant place underneath the ground. Odysseus meets him, and he starts to praise him. Oh, you were such a wonderful soldier. I mean, my goodness, you fought, and we all admired you. And Ajax just sort of cuts him off. Phooey with all that. I would rather be the meanest, in other words, lowest slave in the world and still be alive than be a king of the netherworld. So we're making comments, sure we are, about society and about ideas of afterlife, which is largely the realm of religion, is it not? Well, the boat goes down here. You go through the Straits of Messina right here. On one side you have Skyland, the other one has Charybdis. I forget which is which. Anyway, you have somebody that will either reach in and grab 6 sailors, or you go over and you probably lose a lot more men than that. Sometimes even in modern parlance, people are, shall we say, astute as far as literature is concerned, talk about the choices, the greater and the lesser choices. And obviously, there's going to be problems with each one, but can you choose the better of the two? This is an interpretation. Well, all of his men are killed. Do we want to believe that? Isn't that attractive? Wow, adventures out there because I'm better and stronger than everybody else goes. Now, I would miss my friends, but he's a survivor. Oh, was it Circe? He lives with the witch down here. I believe it's on Malta. He shacks up with her for like years. All good. He's got everything he wants. He's got a physical relationship anytime he wants it. A nice lady who's willing to accommodate him or whatever at any given time. He said for years, but he decides, well, can we say this is a little bit of a drag? Too much pleasure, not enough adventure, not enough challenge. Is this an attractive idea in ancient Greece and Rome? Don't you need a challenge? Just sit home and eat grapes and listen to poetry? Maybe you want more in life than that. This does speak to people's mores and ideas at the time. So finally he decides to go home, which is over here on the west coast of the Peloponnesian Peninsula, over here by Greece. Now, he's been gone, west part of Greece. He's been gone for 20 years. My goodness. what was his wife's name? Penelope? His wife has been faithful to him the entire time. 20 years, and she doesn't even know if he's alive or not, let alone the idea that he's going to come back. Isn't that an endearing kind of character? Isn't this a character that kind of lives with people? Now, at this time, and shall I say a little bit later as well, the Greeks are becoming involved as traders on the Mediterranean. Remember I said the Phoenicians at one time had virtually controlled the trade, particularly the Eastern Mediterranean, but shall we say to a large extent, the entire scope of the Mediterranean. The Greeks, with their very, very great skill and larger population, helps as well, end up taking over the carrying trade. Now, young men are going to have their girlfriends, and if they're married, they got their wives, and they're going to be gone for many months, sometimes years. Sometimes they're not going to come back at all. Don't you want to believe this? That I'm such a man, such a wonderful human being, that my girlfriend, my wife wouldn't even look at anybody else, wouldn't even think anybody else? Is this an endearing kind of idea? Yeah, yes, certainly it is. Everybody wants to believe that. Now, so his wife, Odysseus' wife, is waiting. She doesn't know if he's alive or if he'll ever come back at all. 20 years is a long time to put yourself on hold. In the meantime, his young men from around. Now, he's a wealthy man from a wealthy family. Remember, in literature, we do have a tendency to like to hear stories about people in the upper levels of society, leaders, politicians, rich people, kings, that kind of thing. And this is consistent with this as well. He's an important man, and of course, his lands are very important as well. Now, there are young, good-looking suitors, and they've been bugging this woman for a long time. They say, look, your husband's gone, he's not coming back. Why don't you marry one of us? Obviously, their motive would be not only to marry an attractive woman, but obviously to marry and get the inheritance which should belong to Odysseus. She puts him off and off and off. These guys, I think, are not too bright. She's weaving something, and she says, look, when I'm done with this, you can imagine weaving by hand would be a labor-intensive effort. It would take a long time. But even at that, eventually she would finish it. So she says, when it's done, I will choose one of you to marry. In the meantime, at night, she sews in the daytime. At night, she comes in, removes the stitches. She's not really making any progress. When I say I don't think these guys are too bright, they don't really realize what's happening. When Odysseus comes back, he comes back in disguise. He's not wearing the proper clothing. Nobody recognizes him except the dog. I think the dog's name was Argos. Now, how many years do dogs age versus human years? Is it 7 to 1, 8 to 1, something like that? So if it's 7 to 1, and this dog's 20 years old because he knew the master when he left, this dog's like 140 years of age. This is not a young dog. This is a very elderly dog. He's, according to the poem, he's kind of a mangy mutt, kind of sits around in the garbage heap. I guess the joy of life from him is gone. Well, he's the only one. The dog is the only one that recognizes Odysseus when he comes back. And the dog is so pleased that he wags his tail so fervently that he dies. That's a cute story. Well, then we have this dramatic scene. Finally, Penelope has said, beyond the weaving, if somebody can string Odysseus's bow and shoot it through, is it 9 axe heads? I will marry that person. Let's see. How about Odysseus axe heads? Let's see. The idea was that you would line these up, and if you took the axe head and took the handle out of them, you would have a very, very small opening that would go quite, can we say, a considerable distance. There's another way of looking at it, let's pull this one up, that the axe heads actually had a hole in the center. Let me say that usually if you're going to have this in axe, this does have a tendency to make the weapon a little less, shall we say, durable. The blade is more likely to collapse. I guess that's possible. I guess we do have examples of this in ancient history. But I would argue maybe this is a little bit better way of looking at it. It doesn't really matter. It's a good point of the story. You have another opportunity here. Now, you know what stringing a bow is. When you have a bow, you do not leave it strung. In other words, you don't have the string on the arch, the bow itself, because the tension on the wood is consistent, and that has a tendency to weaken the wood itself. So when you're done using your bow, you unstring it. You have to pull it down a little bit to pull the string off. To string it next morning, whenever you're going to use it again, you hold it, you pull it down, and you take the string and you put it on top of it. Now, you have to bend the entire bow. This takes a little bit of strength, depending on the poundage of the bow. This bow is so strong. All these young, good-looking guys, they can't do it. They can't do it. But then there's a guy in the back of the room whom nobody recognizes. I'm trying to remember, did he close the door before he came in? Any event, he came in. Nobody recognized this guy, and he says, I want the opportunity to string this bow. Nobody could do it. So this guy walks up. I'm sure there's a hush over the room. And he walks up and he grabs that bow, something that nobody else could do. And he drags it down and he strings the bow. Not only this, he takes the shot. It sounds like an impossible shot. It's like Robin Hood splitting the arrow, impossible shot. Well, in this case, it sounds like an impossible shot, but he takes a shot and everything goes right down through the heads of the axes. Yeah, maybe that's not really possible. Remember, we're talking fiction here. What does this sound like to you? What are your favorite daydreams? I'm an old guy. I was an athlete when I was younger. That's a long time ago now. I haven't done anything athletically in a long time. It's kind of hard on the body. But back in the day, well, I still have daydreams. It varies in football season and basketball season. Usually in basketball season, my daydream is this. I'm sitting on the bench. We're playing, who's our crosstown rivals? We're playing University of Utah. We're playing Utah State. We're playing BYU, whoever that might be. And there's just like 2 seconds on the shot clock. Well, let's make it better than that. There's 2 seconds left in the game, and we're down by 2 points. And the coach comes up, points to me on the bench and says, we've got to have a 3-point shot. Can you do it? I said, yeah, coach. Put me in. I can do it. So they put me in. Of course, everybody knows who I am, a good guy. So now they don't double team me. They triple team me. There's guys everywhere, right? Holding me down, blocking my shot. Somehow I pivot, I move, shoot that thing straight up in the air. The buzzer goes off while it's in flight, goes right down through 3 points. We win the game. Now, maybe you spend all your time philosophizing about the nature of being. But I have these little illusions, which are kind of fun. Now let's go back to the Odyssey. Isn't that what we're doing? Isn't that your dream come true? We need a touchdown. Go out for long pass, fantastic catch, unbelievable skill, land in the end zone, win the game. Yeah, we like those kinds of things. At least I do. We like those kind of things. An idea of success. Now it starts getting a little bit tricky. Now that Odysseus has taken the shot, he's still got the bow, it's still strung, he's got more arrows. So he pulls out and starts to kill everybody in the room. All the guys. Take them out. But what had they done? Well, they'd hung around his wife. Why is that terribly surprising? They think he's dead. Or every normal person would think he's dead. But he's there sponging off the family, eating his food, and trying to flirt with his wife, so he kills them all. How well is this going to sit with the families in the area who lost their son to this guy, came back and started laying people out? In his account in the Odyssey, Homer has the singer of songs. In other words, essentially the person in his position, his job. And he comes up to Odysseus as he's killing everybody. Says, "You're not going to kill me, are you?" And Odysseus says, "No, I'll let you go." Well, can that be pretty good for your occupation? You put that in there to say, wait a minute, if people have a barroom brawl here, don't bash a beer bottle over my head. There's something else here as well. And that is that there were female servants who were serving these guys as they're coming over to flirt with Odysseus's wife. So Odysseus kills all of them too. Now they're just doing what they were told to do, what Penelope told them to do. If Penelope had told them, don't wait on these guys, they wouldn't have done so. So they're told to do so. So Odysseus kills them. He hangs them. And the poem talks about their legs twitching as they die. Now, I don't know what statement Homer's making about this. We say, if you want to admire Odysseus, or the character Odysseus, he's gone too far, I think. But now he's home. His 20-year voyage is over. Can we not see that life is not ended for him? Because there are additional challenges. It never ends. Because now he's got to deal with the families of those men that he just murdered. Is that true about our lives, or at least how the ancients wanted to view themselves? We have challenges, we overcome them, we continue to have challenges. Life simply goes on that way. If we look at the great literature, Virgil's Aeneid, Dante's The Inferno, we tend to see very few really enduring characters. But as we look at Homer, the faithful wife, the faithful dog, we have these enduring characters. We have several of them, which are very attractive to us. It's one of the reasons why this work is popular. You don't have to be in a literature class to read it. Sometimes people read it and enjoy it. I never read it for a literature class. I go, I guess I'm not that big into literature. On the other hand, I remember reading it, and it's entertaining. And as you can see, as we have a discussion, I can still remember a lot of it. It's stuck within my brain. It's pretty good stuff. We can make an argument that not only is this the first great European literature, but this could be the greatest single piece of literature in any European language. That's saying quite a bit. In the ancient world, we say Homer is the greatest writer. He has competitors, but he's the greatest writer. In Latin, we have Virgil. I remember asking a classics professor, remember they have to know Greek and Latin. I said, which is the greatest work? Virgil's Aeneid or Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey? And he told me this. He says, well, it depends. I said, well, on what? You see, as the classicists learn languages, Latin is a very hard language, and Greek is even a harder language to learn. And you're going to end up, almost inevitably, being a little bit better with one language than you are with the other. And he said, if your language happens to be stronger in Greek, you tend to think that Homer's better. If your Latin is actually better than your Greek, then you have a tendency to think that Virgil is better. Oh, okay. However you want to look at the greatest European literature, you've got to throw Shakespeare and a few others in the mix as well. But you have to consider Homer within that group. This is among the greatest European literature that's ever been devised, and it might be the greatest. Well, let's go on. We got other things to talk about in Greek civilization. Take a look at Athens. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm not saying that everything that happens of any great importance takes place in Athens, because there's other places where we have significant advances, like Homer's in Ionian Greek. But Athens does have, shall we say, more than its share of important contributors. Let's talk a little bit about Athenian democracy. One of the fascinating aspects of Greek civilization, Greek history, is that we really don't have one way of ruling these various city-states. If you took a political science class and they talked about almost every form of government, almost every form of government is represented one place or another in the Greek city-states. You have monarchy, you have tyranny. Tyranny to us means something that's really bad, right? A bad ruler. Well, usually a tyrant under Greek circumstances, and the Greeks use the term, is somebody who comes to power illegally. Can a tyrant be a dictator? Sure. So, democracy, so I haven't got there yet. Monarchy, oligarchy, aristocracy. I'm running out of my list here, right? Tyranny, dictatorship, and democracy. Athens doesn't start out as a democracy, it starts out as a tyranny or an oligarchy, going way back when. Usually we say around 500 BC. Going back a little before that as well. Athens works toward a democracy. Why would they want a democracy? Well, we have to have a position where people, run-of-the-mill people more or less, end up having a greater interest in government. But they have to have a means of making their opinions felt. Men in the military, the men who are defending your state, can make an interesting appeal. Not only can you say we're important because we defend the state, but it's also important because we have the ability to hurt you. So you tend to listen to soldiers. Remember reading about American democracy, about the development of voting rights? We're talking early on in our republic. But virtually every time there's a war, the voting rights of males, not yet females, go up. Because young men with muskets, and they know how to use them, you might want to listen to them if they want more rights in your state. So the military is a function in ancient Athens. Remember, we are talking about naval power. We're talking about people who trade with ships. We're also talking about people who go to war. There are sails on, I need to show you a Greek ship. Oh, how about trireme? Oh, translator. Well, that's one that I look at a little more carefully. Some of these things can be absolutely enormous. Something can be 200-300 feet long. That's a big ship. Triremes, you have 3 levels of rowers. Well, they do have sails. One of the nice things about sailing the Mediterranean, certain times of the year the winds have a tendency to blow south to north, in other words, from Africa to Europe. Other times of the year, there's a tendency for them to blow north to south. Depending on the time of year, you can go pretty easy north and south. But you need to negotiate into a port or a harbor or a coastline where you want to go. So just being able to go north and south using the sails is not terribly efficient. But if you want to get places, you need to row. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Ben-Hur. Even the silent version, was that in 1927 or something? It's worth seeing. The colorized total sound version was in 1959. Is also something that I highly recommend. Well, this is a depiction of a man who's wrongly accused of a crime, who's now put on these galleys to row them. You remember from the motion picture? It works better with sound than it did with the silent. The guys are in there. Boom, boom. Battle speed. War speed, I think it was. Battle speed. Ramming speed. All these buff guys. I wouldn't last 2 minutes. I'm terribly out of shape. But the idea from Ben-Hur, and this is true of the Romans, you're using slaves to row your ships. Well, slaves rarely are going to ask you for democracy. But on the triremes of the Greeks, it is much more common not to have slaves rowing your ships, but free men. You need them in battle, you need them in trade. They are a very big asset. You can imagine after doing this for a while, they're pretty buff dudes too. When they want more rights in the state, they have a bargaining chip. You need us to row the boats. You need us to be on the ships for trade. Why don't you give us some rights? So there's enough factions involved in Athens and other states for people to appeal for rights. The Athenian democracy is the one that we actually most closely associate with ancient Greece. The deme is kind of how it breaks down. There are like 10 tribes in Athens, and the area around it is called Attica. So a lot of people live within the city of Athens, but the farming area and smaller towns outside is Attica. And remember, I mentioned already earlier, we estimate 40, 45,000 people lived there during the classical age. And you break these down into tribes, 10 tribes. They call them demes. The term deme is where we get the word democracy, because it's people voting within the tribes. The ecclesia, this is all citizens. If you have 40,000 people, half of them are women, so 20,000 are men. Half of those are either too young or feeble. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. You exclude slaves as well. You're talking about a large number of people. Can you say having all the citizens come together for a statement? You can hear a speech or an appeal or a petition and vote. That becomes very cumbersome. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it is very cumbersome. So you usually have your representation through your deme. And we have what we call the boule. It's the Council of 500. Can we say it's a little bit like a legislative assembly? It functions more broadly than this because it's often used as a court as well. These tend to be elderly men. You are paid a certain amount of money, a small amount of money, for serving on this. If you're too old to work, and if you live long enough, you are too old to work, then if you have that situation, how do you support yourself? Well, you can sponge off your kids, which isn't a bad idea, by the way. But you can sponge off your kids. In reality, you get a little bit of pay for this. The idea, however, is these are elderly men. You're supposed to get wisdom as you get older, so they're in a position to make better decisions. Now, this does not mean that you don't have charismatic leaders that guide your speeches and people that can take over certain administrative functions. They still exist as well. But you can see how democracy functions. Almost everybody is supposed to, at some time in their life, not just vote, but vote and serve. And so a lot of men, if they live long enough, are going to end up in the boule. It's inadequate. It's imperfect by far by our standards. It excludes women, just categorically. Women are not involved at all. As we think how long it took for women to get the right to vote, it's actually embarrassing to our system. Very lengthy period of time. The first nation that ever, I'm not talking state or municipality, so I recall the first nation to ever allow women to vote was New Zealand. Am I correct on that? And if I'm also correct, it might be 1892. That's really late in the game. The rights for women are just put off and ignored literally for millennia. Slaves are excluded. Slaves cannot vote. Slaves are an economic asset. They're in control for the good of the owner. Don't want them having really much of a say in society, so they're excluded. Foreigners, people. Athens is an important place economically. There's trade and commerce going on. Of course, people in their business dealings are going to come from various nations and try to talk to you, but they're going to find it convenient to live in and around Athens. But you don't want these people participating in government because they're not citizens, not really living there. Therefore, their stake in what happens in the state is somewhat different than everybody else. About the time when Athenian democracy is established, we start calling this the classical period, also known as the golden age of ancient Greece. As we look at the high points, we can say it starts around 500. Certainly we can do that. But it doesn't get heated up really for a few decades. And then as we get into the 4th century BC, the 300s, it's not quite as glorious as it was before. We can narrow it down to, rather than talking nearly 2 centuries, closer to a century when most of the work's going on. We do argue that one of the things that gets the Greece starting on their brilliant accomplishments, I should say the Athenians starting their brilliant accomplishments, is a level of optimism. We can do things, we can accomplish. One of the things they do is they become victorious in the Persian Wars. There is the empire, the Persian Empire. This is one big place. Remember, I mentioned the 5 major empires that control Mesopotamia. Of all of them, this is the one that's most successful, and it's the one that comes last. This is the Persian Empire. Look at the extent where this thing is. It's absolutely huge. Not only does it control Mesopotamia, that's just a good start. It controls what you and I would call Iran, what you and I would call Pakistan, way over here to India. Large sections of North Africa, Egypt and along the coast, Syria, Palestine, the Anatolian Peninsula, and certain areas on the other side near the coast of the Black Sea. Remember when I showed you the map last time of Greek settlement in the Mediterranean? We do see a few Greeks here. Remember, we see Greeks virtually all along the Black Sea. And the Ionian Greeks are right here on the eastern side of the Aegean Sea. In other words, we have a number of Greeks that are under the control of the Persians. Now, the reputation the Persians have, their idea for empire, is actually pretty good. They tend to tolerate you unless you make trouble for them. If you pay your tribute, keep your mouth shut, they don't push you around very much. Remember when we were talking about the Bible, the book of Isaiah, and the return of some of the Jews from Babylon to Palestine. Remember Cyrus, we also know him as Cyrus the Great, allowed these people to return. And in the book of Isaiah, the prophet is very happy saying, oh, Cyrus supports what we're doing. So Cyrus is essentially does the Lord's will. Now that's a pretty high compliment to give somebody who's not a Jew, somebody of a foreign power. In looking at the Persians, they're really not that brutal. But remember, if you rebel, then they become a problem. Rather than simply living over here under Persian rule and largely being tolerated if you don't bother them and pay tribute, the Ionians revolt in this area. Let's go back to ancient Greece. Does this one work for us? Oh, probably is. Yeah, that one might be a little bit better. The Ionian Greeks are over here. They're being controlled by the Persians. And in 499 BC, they revolt. They don't want to be controlled by anybody else. They want to be Greeks. They want to be controlled by themselves. Now, in doing this, they appeal to the Greeks over here. Oh, goodness. Come on, we're your Greeks, we're your pals, we're your buddies. And the Greeks, the Athenians, and others send aid from here over here. Now, the revolt is unsuccessful. But let's say you look at this from the standpoint of the Persians. They're looking and saying, we got this western area over here, and we got a revolt on our hands, kind of pain in the neck. We're going to have continual problem with the Ionian Greeks over here, as long as we have this other area, which has already sent aid, is willing to send sometimes troops, sometimes money, sometimes other resources to aid them. In other words, if we're going to control this, we've got to take this out. So now we have the resources of the Persian Empire. This is going to bear down on the idea of conquering and maybe even destroying. Remember, if you resist, they're mean to you. Conquering and maybe destroying many of these areas over here. Oh, let's see. This is ancient Athens. I should have shown you this earlier. Remember, I said the city of Athens. This is a representation of the city. And Attica, of course, is the area by it. Let's go to the Battle of Marathon. Take a look at this. The Persians have an impressive navy. And they decide that one of the best ways of getting to them is just take their armies by sea, take them across the Aegean Sea, land on the coast. And now that does away with any large marching that you might want to do, might have to under the circumstances. And so you land over here. The Persians are a large empire. They're rich as well. They have a lot of resources. They have a huge amount of manpower. What can the Greeks do in this scenario? Well, where's my map? Pulled up, then I forget what I did with it. That's not it. Okay. This is fairly close to Athens. Fairly close. So the Athenians are really quite worried about this. They appeal to all the other Greeks, come and help us. Who do you want? Well, you want the Spartans, among other peoples. The Spartans are extremely good soldiers. Their reputation is literally stunning, and the Athenians beg the Spartans to come and help them. The Spartans are slow in reacting. Were they beating kids, locking up their soldiers, whatever they were doing? They did not deploy troops. So it's really up to Athens if you want to have an initial engagement against the Persians rapidly. What we have happening is this. The Athenians know they're badly outnumbered. But let's take it to the enemy. Soon after the Persians got off the boat, remember the large numbers of men. They haven't moved up to the high country. The Athenians believe, and they've got very heavily armed men. They call them hoplites, these heavily armed men. And if we can get them in a rush, going downhill, you go a little faster. I know it's very fatiguing to carry heavy armor, but you go in fast and you hit them before they have a good time to react, which is my best map. We usually say that here it is, that the Athenians hit them on the flank and in the center. It's very successful at relatively small cost. In other words, it's not a slaughter of the Athenians, but it is a slaughter of the Persians. At very small cost, they're victorious. This is a stunning accomplishment. Now, one of the reasons why they are successful, I already mentioned running downhill, but the hoplites, have a tendency to have very heavy armor. They have heavy shields, have breastplates, they have shin guards, they have helmets. And if you come in to fight with these people, It's very challenging because you can whack them around without literally doing a lot of damage to them because of the heavy armor. I have this down here, it changes military tactics. That now people realize that the heavily armed soldier is probably superior to the people that are less heavily armed. Can I show you a hoplite here? Yeah, we can see these guys really have heavy armor. Remember, the helmet, the breastplate, the shin guards, a heavy shield. You have a spear, or if you throw it, it's a javelin. So you do get an idea that this is very impressive. Now, here's an interesting story. I love to ask the students. There was a man who was told to take to take the news of the victory back to Athens. So he was probably tired anyway. He fought an entire battle. He threw his armor off, and he ran all the way from Marathon to Athens. And it was so taxing money physically. All they could do was run to the city and yell, "Rejoice!" before he drops dead. Now here's a trick I like to play on my students. I'm a mean man. See, I'm trying to trip them, trying to trick them. And I say, "How far was it?" And people say, "Well, 26 miles." Was it 26 miles, 263 yards, something like that in the modern marathon? And I say, that's about 22 miles. But wait a minute, when we run the marathon, it's longer than that. Well, when they started running the marathon, reliving this largely the 19th century. As I remember the story, there was a little nobleman's boy. He wanted to see the runners. But the runners started too far away. So they extended the race so the little boy could watch the guys run. Is that true? I don't know. But anyway, they've extended the race a little bit more. It is, I guess initially the idea was 22 miles, but now, of course, it's gone over 26 miles. Trivia, right? Now we have a choice that the Athenians can make. Remember, we're talking about a democracy where the resources of the city and Attica and the state are up to the decisions that's made by the people. Usually the bolle, but sometimes you can have other people voting as well. And there is do I have it here? The silver mines at Larium. Larium is actually down on the coast. It's just part of Attica, just down farther over here, if I'm not mistaken. It is nearby. They found silver. Silver mines. Whoa! Money, 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 money. So, wow. Hello. A lot of money in silver. And that's what coinage is. It's literally, it's money. You can use it for decorative arts and that kind of thing, but it is money. And money talks. Now, you could probably look at the very large amount of wealth coming out of the silver mines. And the Athenians could sit down and say, okay, we're not talking about slaves, foreigners, and women. We're talking about us. And maybe you divide it up and have a pretty good purse of coins in your pocket. That would be a choice. But what they decide to do, rather than this, to take the silver and use it to build a fleet. Before I get off this entirely, there were slaves in Greece, slaves in Athens, at the same time of this democracy. The slaves were not all the same in their categories. The worst conditions you were probably in as a slave in Athens was to be working in the silver mines of Larium. When you were put in the silver mines, they didn't want to carve out a large section because takes longer and harder work. You simply want to follow the seams of silver. The seams of silver are not that big. So you go into the silver mines, quite frankly, the slaves in there are really not even able to stand up. So literally you're laying down with some kind of pick or some kind of implement, whacking to get these stones so they can be pulled out later and smelted into silver. Often these slaves are put in here, and they only brought you out when you were dead. It was really a death sentence to go there. So as much as we want to admire Athenian democracy, it always has a rough side. Well, okay, what are we doing with the money? Let's build a fleet. Oh, big fleet. Now, remember the Persians came by sea. There was nothing Athens really could do in 490 BC. But in 480 BC, now they have a fleet, so have other opportunities. I believe it was Darius, or Darius, however you want to pronounce it, who was the emperor of the Persians during the Battle of Marathon. He sent over this initial attack fleet. Well, he's gone by another 10 years, and Xerxes, spelled an X. Who is, okay, yeah, we got Xerxes here. Spelled with an X, so you can see it up here. And he is the one who sets up the second attack. In other words, the second round of the Persian Wars. The first one is Marathon. The second one is, well, it's more complicated than a single victory. There are several victories involved. Okay, I didn't pull that up. I'm a little bit behind here. So let's go to Thermopylae. Maybe we need a map. Okay, Thermopylae. What the Persians did, maybe we need to come over here. What the Persians did, they came by land and they came by sea. Now, if we can believe Herodotus, and Herodotus is prone to exaggeration. I have a very hard time believing that Herodotus was completely accurate in his description. But he said the way the Persians took this huge army of 1 million men. One of the reasons why I think this is an exaggeration. You have that many men on the march. There aren't any roads that can accommodate that many people. The logistics involved would be daunting. How could you even feed that many people? How could you find water for that many people? It's hard to believe that that is the accurate number. However, we do want to think that there is a very large number of people involved, of soldiers involved in this attack. When you come up here to the Hellespont, the Dardanelles, let's get it both here. See this area right here? Is this a better? That's probably a better map. The Dardanelles, right here. You can march up to here, but then you got a problem. I'm not sure exactly how far it is across. I think it's about a mile. You have a navy. These guys march up the coast. They can't swim across. Perhaps what you should do is get your ships and put them on and ferry them back and forth. That's cumbersome and slow. According to Herodotus, Greek historian, the Persians lashed their boats together. You tie them together like a pontoon bridge. Let's give you an example of pontoon bridge. You see, maybe this is a pretty good example right here. Notice that we have, and I'm not sure exactly what to call these, they might be boats. And what you do is you take these boats and you lash them together so the boats don't wander off. And then at that point, you run a roadbed, rails, or whatever you want to call it, across here. The way we usually hear about pontoons is in a military sense. Because in wartime, this is a very quick way to build a bridge across a river or a stream. We read about this a lot in wartime. Is this a better example? Probably not, but the idea was here that what the Persians did is lash all their ships together. And in doing so, they just laid down a roadbed, wood or whatever, across it. So when the Persians came to the Dardanelles, they didn't have to be ferried across, they marched across to the other side. That's clearly possible. It's also very, very clever how they've done that. Now let's get back over here. This time, the allies of Athens come to help. The Spartans send a group of about 300 men. Now, we often talk about the stand of the 300, these 300 guys. However, if we look at the record by Herodotus, yeah, there's 300 Spartans there, but they were not alone. There was like 700 other auxiliaries. So the Persians aren't just dealing with 300 Spartans to block the pass. The actual number is closer to 1,000 Greek troops. They're marching down here, around here along the coastline. And their geographic knowledge, is this helpful here? Their geographic knowledge isn't terribly good, because later on they realize, I'm not sure what I'm seeing here. I still don't know what I'm seeing. Anyway, it's right along the coast. They're marching along the coast. And so there's a pass, there's hills on one side and the river, or should say the sea on the other. And that's where the Spartans take their stand. Now, it's not a good chance you're going to be able to hold off the Persian forces, but in a narrow area, the Persians can't deploy their huge number of men. They can only really come down the road by the pass. So you have enough men standing there, you can block them if they're willing to stand there long enough. This can buy time for the Athenians. It can buy time for the other Greek city-states to respond. So they're really here to sacrifice, if you will, to buy time. Now, our source on this is Herodotus. Remember, he's a little subject to exaggeration. In any event, the king of the Spartans that leads their army is a man by the name of Leonidas. And of course, the Persians, they don't want to mess with these contingent. They just want to push on and do their work. However, they try to negotiate with the Greeks. Look, you fools, you can't possibly resist us. When we fire our arrows, there's so many arrows in the sky, they blot out the sun. And then Leonidas supposedly yelled back, good, then we'll fight in the shade. Trouble with that is, of course, what's Herodotus' sources? All the Spartans are killed. They're not around to tell anybody. I don't think the Persians are going to talk about this. They're trying to brag up their enemies. Anyway, it's a very good story. I don't know if you've seen the movie. Is it called The 300? Can't remember what it's called. I've seen it. It's called 300. 300? Just the 300? Is that what I'm looking at here? Yeah. It was a big hit. It was a big hit. Balderdash. Okay. One of the things, I know, leave the historian at home, enjoy the movie. The Persians are the ugliest form of human being you've ever seen. Of course, the Spartans, I mean, these guys are just incredible six-pack abs. You know, right? One of the things that got me is, see if I can get a representation here, what I'm talking about. Spartan soldiers, you see, what is he wearing? He's wearing a skirt. If it's no longer, we call it a dress. That's not macho enough, is it? Not to our modern eyes. So when we see the 300, they tend to be wearing, shall we say, a little bit more glorified G-strings. But they're wearing really tight leather pants. And I'm going, what, you trying to show guys buns or something here? Is that what you're saying in the motion picture? So I'm saying, okay, you pay fast and loose for the details. If you like blood and guts and gore, it's a pretty good flick. If you're trying to understand really what Greek warfare was like, you probably don't want to spend a lot of time looking at this for detail. However, it's a great story. The Battle of Thermopylae, the Spartans are defeated and annihilated. The Spartans are, excuse me, I said that wrong. The Persians are successful. Now they push forward. Not only do they reach Attica, but they reach Athens. They take Athens, they sack it, and they burn it. Very important to remember, because later on, when the Athenians are building some of the more beautiful buildings in ancient Greece, probably in the history of the world, one of the reasons why they're doing this is they have to rebuild their city because it's been torched. However, you've defeated the Spartans. They have other Spartans around as well. The Athenian army has not been brought into play, even though Athens has fallen. But then at Salamis, the Persian fleet is destroyed. Let's go to Salamis. Okay. Down here off the coast, way off here. Down here off the coast of Attica is the island of Salamis. The Persians believe that in order to continue to advance, it's a pretty good idea if you can get in and control the coastline. Now, the Athenian navy is heavily outnumbered. But what happens is this. When the Persians narrow their front, it's a little bit like them attacking Thermopylae. We have a large army to go attack on a very small front. Now you come in here and you attack your navy on a small front, which now, a little bit like the Spartans under Leonidas. You come in here and now we have the opportunity to engage you and negate, to a certain extent, your numerical advantage. Because at the point of contact, the Athenians have virtually as many ships in the battle as do the Persians. We can't really talk about different kinds of tactics versus men on the ground as sailors at sea. Essentially, sailors at sea fight in the same manner people do on the ground, except you're not marching against your enemy, you're sailing towards your enemy. So in a very, very stunning piece of work, the Athenians are able to push through the Persian army and Persian navy, destroy them. A very big defeat. One of the reasons why the Persian navy was here was to be a support for the army. Remember, you got a large army. It's hard to supply them. If you have a navy that can continue as the Persians march along the coast, you have a navy to support you, then you have a much better chance of continuing your march because you have enough food, for example. With the defeat of the Persian navy, this does not mean that the army has been defeated, but it does mean that now the Persian ability to support the army is somewhat less. So now you have to recall a lot of your men. You simply can't supply them. The army is still there, it's still large, but it's not nearly as numerically superior. We often say that the Battle of Salamis is actually critical in the defeat of the Persians. However, the other battles, things Plataea, see if my memory works right in this case. Probably no way. Plataea, India. Well, now we have a coalition. Okay, it works. Leave us the next year, so that would be 479 AD, where now the Persian army is met by a coalition, Athenians and other nations, get together with their army, and they defeat the Persian army on the field. So now the Persian army is gone. I said that wrong. Persian navy is gone, and the Persian army's been badly defeated. The maneuver, okay, somebody knocked them off the field. So now the army's been defeated. So the Persian navy is gone, and now the army, what's left of it, has to retreat back into Persia. As stunning as it may sound, the Greeks, with far less resources, are victorious in winning the Persian Wars. Let's go back and continue to discuss the Greek civilization. Pericles is a member of the Athenian democracy. Remember, I mentioned to you earlier that even if you have a democracy, one man, one vote, that kind of thing, which can be quite nice, literally. But you always have a charismatic. I mean, you're not going to have 500 men at the boule standing at every given time saying, it's my turn to talk. That's cumbersome. You have a charismatic leader. You talk to him. He represents your ideas. He can stand up there and speak in such a manner to influence you in certain directions. We often say that under Pericles' authority, if not rule, is when we see the biggest single advances in many aspects of Greek civilization. We can call this the classical period, we can call this the golden age, but sometimes we even hear this referred to as the age of Pericles. He's that important. I mentioned him just a minute ago as being important for his orations. We often have records of his orations in which he is so eloquent that sometimes this is considered to be not only good speech making, but good literature. So we have a good idea of how he inspires the people of Athens, how he inspires them to greater efforts, artistic and also militarily. Now, you and I know from the scope of history that the Persians try twice to go into Greece. Remember, the first one ends up in Marathon, second one, Salamis, and Plataea. No one knows, however, if the Persians are going to try it again. Their resources are huge. Their wealth is impressive. Isn't there a pretty good chance that they might try it again? We know that they will, but we don't know that they won't. So we are trying to figure out a way to continue our defenses just in case. It's good to be prepared. So Athens thinks that a lot of the other Greek states owe them something, owe them a favor. Not only they're victorious at Marathon, but it was their resources, their wealth, their silver mines at Larium, where they're able to build the fleet, which is really the only fleet there, in the defeat of the Persian fleet at Salamis. And in the process, not only we put all our wealth in that direction, we got trashed. Okay, our city got burned. So what Athens decides to do, remember under Pericles and other people, they decide that sometimes we call them the Athenian Empire, sometimes we actually call them client states. But are the Persians going to come back? Well, maybe. If they do, we have to be ready. If they don't, we have to be ready anyway, just in case they do. Do we want to keep the fleet up? Absolutely. This fleet was essential at Salamis. Very expensive. Now, the idea is to take all these client states, all these people around the Aegean primarily, and say, okay, build us some ships so we'll have a unified fleet. Well, a lot of these people don't have the wealth. It's expensive to build ships, and they don't really have the technical expertise either. So the Athenians come by with this deal. They say, oh, by the way, you give us the money. We have the expertise. We can build the ships. You give us the money. We'll build the ships. And the ships will be used not only for our defense, but for your defense and defense of all the Greeks. On paper, this seems like a pretty good deal, doesn't it? So let's get an idea of what we're talking about. The Delian League, remember, largely areas around the sea. These are the people going to be more interested in the sea defense. If you have somebody in the interior, they're probably not nearly as interested because they're not threatened by any possible attacks from the sea. This seems like a good deal. So these people give money to Athens. And then Athens, remember, it got burned. They say, well, now we got all this money coming in. Do we really want to use this for its intended purposes? It's our money. Well, it's not our money. But why don't we just take it and build the public monuments? Remember, Athens was burned. The buildings on the Acropolis were burned. We really want to rebuild these, don't we? Don't we set a bunch of charred ruins on top? So we'll take money that's designed for defense and we use it for art, our art. So we have another problem here. Of course, the members of the Delian League, the client states, look at this and go, well, yeah, you got the Parthenon and other buildings up there. They look pretty cool. But you're robbing us from our money to aggrandize yourself. So some of the client states say, we're not going to give you any more money. They want the Athenians to give the money back they gave to them. The Athenians say, forget it. Then client states say, look, we're not going to give you any more money. You're squandering it away. Remember, Athens has the navy, and virtually most of these areas, which are around on the sea, have access to the navy. So anytime you have somebody that will not pay, you send the Athenian navy over there to force them. And they're not nice about it. They come in, they plunder, they beat you up. They remove the leaders of your state and move somebody back in that they will trust them more. Of course, as soon as the Athenian navy goes away, then sometimes local people don't like the local Athenian rulers here. So the Athenians do have a tendency to leave a permanent military establishment. In other words, we can call this an empire. They are literally controlling these people. Now, what are you going to do? I mean, you can band together, and they do this. But can we say it's a little bit like Big Brother? Somebody picks on you, and then you get somebody better to pick back. Well, who can possibly meet the strength of the Athenians? That's the Spartans. So now we're introducing the area where we get to the Peloponnesian War. And I'm dead out of time as usual. We will discuss this next time. But then we'll start getting into civilization, which includes the writing of history, the theater, architecture, sculpture. But we'll do that next time. In the meantime, let's see how much time I've got left. A few seconds. Give me long enough to say, appreciate you. Remember, I came through for you because I could see in your eyes that you wanted to hear more about Homer. So you're more about Homer, and we'll get into more about civilization, the core of Greek civilization next time. In the meantime, I hope you're having a great day. Whatever you do, enjoy.